Welcome everyone to today's episode of Flat Tire Dan. Before we get into today's content, I just kind of wanted to touch base on our last episode where we visited the Buck Motorsports Park and just kind of say again how much we really enjoy going there, how family friendly it is, and how welcoming they are and affordable it is, and just, you know, how much of a great day it is. If you're geographically close to me, which I think most of my viewers are at this point, it's definitely worth a day trip. You may also notice in that video our format kind of changed a little bit. At much suggestion from friends and viewers, we've created our own YouTube channel, Flat Tire Dan. And by we, I mean my buddy Brody, who made sure I paid attention while he did it, so hopefully I can maintain it myself. And you'll see that the videos kind of flow a little smoother, maybe a little more professional. Once again, my buddy Brody put all that together, although he made sure that I paid attention while he did it, so I can kind of continue doing that stuff myself. So hopefully you enjoy it. I will continue to post like reminders on Facebook when we do post a new video, but if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, then you'll get alerts every time I come out with a new video. So for today's video, the content for today is more of along the lines of did you know? You know, kind of like an informative research kind of project that I've been working on for a little bit, and hopefully you'll enjoy it, and hopefully it'll inspire, you know, people to, like, it was really fun, you know, and I'll kind of touch on that as we go through, but I really enjoyed the whole process, and so maybe, you know, someone will get similar ideas about stuff in their own world. But did you know that from 1908 to 1941, you could order and purchase, including an instructions manual, everything you would need to build a new home, and have it delivered to the local railway station from the Sears catalog, Sears, Roebuck and Company catalog. Now, before I get into all that, I'm assuming that some of my viewers may not know what a Sears catalog is. In short, it was the Amazon of my youth. It was a giant catalog. You know, in its heyday, it was 4 pounds heavy. It offered over 100,000 items that Sears would sell, and it was very similar to Amazon, where you would kind of, you know, look in the index to the department you were looking for, and you would page to that page, and you would find what you were looking for, and you would fill out an order form and mail them, you know, the order form and a check, and in a few days or a few weeks the items would show up on your front porch. When it was at its peak, from what I read, over 1/5 of the country subscribed to the Sears catalog. I remember as a kid, right around this time of year, you know, after we got back to school from the summertime, we would watch for the mailman every day and ask him, is the Sears, you know, you have a Sears catalog? And I remember it being like the worst day of his year because it was 4 pounds, you know, and 1/5 of the country got it. And I'll digress a little bit. So, you know, I talk about the memories of that kind of stuff from when I was a kid. Like when that Sears catalog would show up, I remember my parents, like they would let my sister have it for a few days, and then I could have it for a few days, and we would go through and make our Christmas list for Santa and for my parents, and then we would sit down at the table and kind of go through those lists, and like it really was fond memories, like stuff I hadn't thought about in a really long time, you know, like those days when I was young and the Sears catalog was where you got your stuff, and it actually brought back a smell memory. Like for those of you that are familiar with the Sears catalog and kind of lived through it like I did, it had a certain smell to it, you know, and just sitting while I was, you know, putting together this information and thinking about, you know, those times and how long ago it was, like I really enjoyed it. Like it really brought back fond memories. But back to the content. So you could order a whole house out of a catalog, and it would be delivered to the local railway station. So I guess I'll start with how Sears got into this business. And they weren't the only player in the business, but somewhere around the turn of the century, and from what I read, I think the Sears catalog started in the 1890s sometime, but that might not be entirely accurate. So if I'm inaccurate, please correct me in the comments. They came out with the Sears catalog, and it was a hit because, like, back then there weren't a lot of stores. I mean, there were stores, but they weren't like condensed like they are today. And you know, sometimes it was a whole day's ride in your carriage with your horses to go to that store and get what you needed. And so when the Sears catalog came out and you could actually order things and then have them, you know, at least delivered to your local, you know, mail station or whatever it may be. It was a big change in the world, and people were all over it. And so Sears, you know, and the whole catalog end started growing, and at some point they decided around 1900 to add building materials, lumber and bricks and roofing material to that catalog for people to order, and they assumed it was going to be as big of a hit as everything else, and so they stocked up on all these materials, you know, getting ready for the whole world to be ordering stuff from them. And it turned out that it wasn't as big of a hit as they thought it would be. Like, people were still going to their local mills and their local, you know, hardware centers to get their stuff. And so all of a sudden Sears had all this stockpile of material and nothing to do with it, or at least not a lot to do with it. And so, you know, the greatest minds at Sears got together, you know, 1905, 1906, and decided, well, why don't we start designing homes and sell those designs and the materials to build those homes through our catalogs, which in turn might be a good, you know, resource center for us, and at the same time maybe move some of this inventory that we kind of stocked up on that nobody's buying. And so in 1908 they released the first catalog on Sears Craftsman homes. Now they're somewhere, some places I look, they're referred to as Craftsman's homes, sometimes they're referred to as Sears modern homes, but they seem to be the same from what I was able to gather. Now Sears wasn't really the only player in the game when they got in this. Their major competition would have been a company called Aladdin. And so, you know, Sears being Sears, and you know, a good business model would be to differentiate yourself from your competition. And so what Sears decided to do was focus on the technology of the day, like heat, indoor plumbing, asphalt roofing shingles, plaster wallboards, you know, as opposed to that plaster and lath that you find in these old houses, you know, when you go to renovate and it's, you know, it's just a killer mess. You know, just all kinds of renovations, inlay hardwoods and all kinds of stuff to differentiate themselves, which it appears they did. And it grew and grew and grew, you know, from 1908 to 1941. I think at one point I read during the 30s, they had over 370 models to choose from. And from, say, the beginning when they started until, you know, their later days in the 30s, you know, the prices have gone from like $600 a home to $6,000 a home, you know. Like, that's how great the demand was and how much people were interested in that. And so the material will be delivered to your local railway station. Now, they didn't include like foundation materials like rocks and stone and bricks. So they suggested that you work on that portion of your house while you waited for the materials to be delivered to the local railway station. And from what I read, it would take approximately 90 days. From the day you ordered the house to the day your materials would show up for you to go pick up was approximately 90 days. Now, most of these houses that still exist today or that were ever built were focused East Coast, this side of the Mississippi, you know, north of the Carolinas, because that's where the railroad track was at the time. You know, I mean, there was track that went out west and stuff, but not a lot of it. And so most of these houses that were purchased were done up and down the East Coast. I did see one in California, a couple in Florida, but the bulk of them were kind of along the eastern seaboard. And they went like hotcakes. Now, I read somewhere that in 1939, Sears sold $7 million worth of Craftsman or modern homes out of their catalogs. Now, that's $7 million in 1939 money. And I don't know what the conversion is today, but it seems like a lot. And then 1941 came along, World War II, and Sears, like a lot of, you know, American companies, voluntarily diverted their efforts and their resources to the war effort. And so they kind of shut down their model home, you know, department and started working on things to benefit the war effort. And I believe I read somewhere that the government actually put like an order or like a very strong suggestion that would curtail all non-essential construction. And that went on for the entire length of the war, 1945, 1946. And then Sears intended to kind of get back into the business after the war was over. But at that time, like, so much technology had advanced in that short period of time that, you know, by the time, you know, they were to get back into business, more localized stuff was going on and people didn't need to order nationally for their home, you know. And so they kind of got out of the business in the early 50s, but it went on for, you know, half a decade. And everything I read said it was a pretty big deal. And there's a lot of these houses out there. No total numbers, but a lot of these houses out there. How would you know, right? How would you know if you had a Sears Craftsman, Sears Modern, Sears Kit home? Well, there's some telltale stuff. The easiest way would be hopefully to kind of root around your attic or your basement and see if you can find like old paperwork, like receipts, order forms, you know, the holy grail, the 75-page construction manual, which I would imagine would be difficult, but like any type of documentation you might find in your older house would obviously be the first place that would kind of help you identify, you know, where your house came from, who built your house, that kind of thing. But also like design features. For Sears, you know, and maybe a lot of other builders at the time, the covered front porch was almost a mainstay on every house. You know, it was sort of the outdoor area where the family convened. Like, you know, my house, obviously, and I'll get to that, was built in 1925 and is a Sears Craftsman home, and that's kind of why I got into this research. But my house is on a pretty busy road, and the house is relatively close to the road. But in 1925, the road wasn't that busy. And so that's where people convene to kind of see who was coming and going, and, you know, if your friends were on their way or whatever. So the covered front porch is almost a telltale sign of a Sears Craftsman home. Big square columns kind of make a statement out of the front porch. They were big into dormer style houses, which is where the living space in the second floor is kind of built into the roof system because it's super efficient. You're not wasting like roof space. You're getting as much living space as you can out of the square footage. Some particular type stuff would be if like your basement is unfinished and you can get in and see like the lumber they built the house with. A lot of times on the end of the lumber, there's like little stencil marks or markings, engravings of some sort. I am actually going to post a picture of one of those I found online. Some of the door hinges might be stamped or engraved that say Sears or Aladdin or whomever. Door hardware and that kind of stuff might have similar markings. And I think one of the biggest things that I kind of found, and this was just somebody's sort of independent research, is if you look at your house, right, and you look at the millwork or the doors or the stuff that's kind of unique to your home, and every room is the same, like the millwork and the doors going into the bathroom are the same that are in the dining room, you know, two completely different uses, and it's all identical, more than likely it was a kid house. Like more than likely all that stuff was set out the same, as opposed to maybe a custom house who would differentiate the trim and the doors in the dining room and the living room as compared to closets and stuff like that. That's a huge indicator that I found. It was just an opinion online that I saw. And one of the other things they pointed out is if you think your house might be one of these houses, look how close you are to a railroad. Because remember, these things were delivered by rail to the closest railroad station. If you live 40 miles from a railroad track, more than likely you're not buying you know, back then, a whole house that you have to then, you know, ship in some fashion to where you want to build it. But if you're close to railroad and you've got all these other sort of hints and stuff, then your house might actually be one. You can always go to your municipality. Public records usually will state the origin of your home. But it was like super interesting to kind of find different ideas on how to identify whether or not you have a certain type of home and what year it was built and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like, even if you don't have an older house, or maybe your parents do or your grandparents do, like, it was a really fun project. I really enjoyed doing it. It was just kind of like thought provoking, and it kind of, you know, led me into looking at different stuff and looking closer at my own home. And so hopefully, you know, will inspire you guys to kind of do similar stuff. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I will be including some pictures of Triton today because I know you guys enjoy those. Remember, we're on YouTube now. So, you know, if you see this link in my Facebook page and it takes you to YouTube, if you subscribe, you'll get notifications from YouTube that, you know, every time I release a new video. I'm actually starting to use my Instagram account again a little bit, just as, once again, like, just post the, you know, the link to YouTube. My Instagram account, in case you want to follow me, is Dan93 Fox. Why is that my name? Well, I think that's some content for a future video. And remember, stay tuned for more content from Flat Tire Dan. See ya. Go Birds.